next topic would be sanding, I guess. So let's dive into that, because I know a lot of guys, we were talking yesterday. I think a lot of guys get confused about this. And that's one of the things that happens to new guys is they want to rush the process. They're like, I spent 3 weeks building this. I want to finish this in 2 days and get it done. Well, if it took you 3 weeks to build it, possibility, depending on the complexity of it, it might take you that long to finish it, depending on how many parts. It kind of almost works out the same. Now, when you get to a higher level, obviously you can do things faster, but take your time and don't rush the process would be something else that I would say to brand new finishers is it's a process, and to do it right, it takes a significant amount of time, especially if you're allowing things to dry right.
And on that note, actually, Dennis Rodriguez, another buddy of ours and a finisher here in California, he puts out a phenomenal finish. And one of his key secrets is make the primer coat look like the finish coat. So you don't skimp on, if you see a scratch, you putty it, or if you sand it so that you want every step of the way to be perfect. That way, the next step, you're not trying to cover something up with, and that's a recipe for disaster. If you think you put on a primer coat and it's got some issues on it, but you think, oh, my next coat's going to cover that up, no, it won't, and you'll have more of a mess stuck to you. So if you take your time with the primer coat, and that might mean you spray it once, you sand it, but you sand through someplace, so you have to spray it again, and then you spray it again and you sand it down, and now you see some scratches. So then you putty those, but now you have to primer coat it again and then sand it down again. But now you get a little too aggressive and you sand through an edge, so you have to hit that with a little bit of a primer. And if you make that door look perfect with the primer, the top coat is going to look phenomenal.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. That's sort of the secret with water base, even more so than solvent. Like with solvent, you have a little bit more of a buffer because of the way it works. It will dissolve the next coat and become one. So, but with water base, whatever's underneath it will translate to the top of it. So right. If your primer looks bad, you've got orange peel in your primer, I don't care if you lay it down with a Sada or the best gun, whatever it is on the market, you're still going to see it.
Right. And on a note, by the way, and I don't have it up on my website, but you've done a number of things with Surf Prep. Annex is bringing in Surf Prep. I've got to get it on the website, but we have the sanders, we have the sandpaper now, which is a great tool to help you sand high profile doors or raised panel doors and different things like this.
Yeah, definitely. If you're serious about finishing, and even if you're just a cabinet guy that does his own finishing, if you don't have a Surf Prep or something along those lines, like a 3x4 sander, you're doing yourself a major injustice, because those things are perfect for sanding doors, especially cabinet doors. They really shine. But even furniture, getting inside of hard to reach areas, because basically you've got a square pad, so you can get into corners that you can't get in with a round sander.
Right, and you have a foam pad that will go over molding and get a reasonably good job first pass. And sometimes you still have to go over it with your hand, but
sure.
A reasonably good job of crown molding and things that have a profile on them. So
yeah, and they make all kinds of interface pads that you can put sandpaper on as well. So definitely check that out for sure. Now, while we're talking about prep, and I want to get back into sandpaper, but one of the things that a client of yours found was sort of what we call the cheat code to water base is vinyl sealer.
One of my finishers, a gentleman by the name of Jody Toole, who's since passed away, but was an incredible finisher and a great guy and a good friend of mine. He found that one of the things that when you put down a water-based coating, it does not tend to enhance the look of the wood. Sometimes it comes out rather flat looking. So and that contrast once you put on a lacquer, for instance, a solvent-based lacquer, that contrast between the wood and the grain is called grain strike, and that gives it a bit more contrast, and it gives it a bit more pop, and it looks great. With water-based, that grain strike isn't as pronounced, and it looks a little flatter. So Jody found out that that the water base actually stuck very well to what's known as a vinyl sealer, and a vinyl sealer it's in the solvent world, and it's a hybrid sealer that has actually some plastic in it, to be simple, which makes it extremely water resistant as a system. In the solvent world, a pre-cat lacquer, and along with a vinyl sealer is a fairly good system for kitchens. So a pre-cat lacquer alone won't work very well because the water will get underneath it, and pretty soon your cabinets will start peeling. But a pre-cat with a vinyl seal underneath it, pretty good system. Anyway, he found that you could use the vinyl sealer under water base, and it gave it the grain strike that you needed to make it look nice and have the grain pop, and it also gave it that enhanced water resistance, and it works great. And so now we sell tons of vinyl sealer for water base.
Yeah, and somebody's going to ask the question, so what would be the point of using, I call them hybrid systems, what would be the point of using a solvent if you're using a water-based top coat? So I'm going to give my take on that, and then you can agree or disagree with me on that. But so the deal is, and Greg kind of alluded to this, water-based primers, up until, I don't know, maybe probably 2 years ago, they just weren't that good. A lot of issues with them, in terms of, like, you could get, what we call tannin bleed through, or dye migration in a refinish, or you could have bleed through plywoods and other things like that, because essentially what would happen is the water would wet the glues or whatever was in the plywoods or the woods and basically draw it to the surface, and you could just keep piling on finish, and it would never go away.
Right.
Now we have solutions to that. Also, what I will tell you too is a vinyl sealer lays down so flat to a surface, it kind of eliminates the issue for a ton of sanding. So you're going to actually sand less with a vinyl sealer than you would a water-based primer, just due to the nature of the way that it works and lays out. However, I will tell you that you cannot grind on a vinyl sealer because of the plastics that are in it. If you try to grind on it, essentially what you do is you heat it up and it will ball up on your sandpaper. Now, the CIC is kind of one of those unique ones that you can sand more aggressively than you can some of the other vinyl sealers that are on the market. So essentially what it does is, that's why I call it the cheat code to water base. And also it dries significantly faster than a water-based primer will. The drawbacks, though, are you got to deal with, the smell. And then also you've got the solvents, the flammability. And then, again, you can't really grind on the surface. The pluses, though, are, again, it lays down such a even finish that it makes it easier to get a final product because of the way it lays down. It's significantly faster, and it will block and deal with a whole host of issues, from contamination to tannin bleed. It's like, to me, it's got to be one of the ultimate finishes that have ever been designed, in my opinion. It just, I mean, they call me the king of vinyl sealer because someone asks me a question and I'll go, vinyl sealer. What vinyl sealer? It's like a broken record. But the thing is, it cures so many ills, and it will go under anything. I mean, 2K polyurethanes. I mean, whatever. It just works.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. And I'm happy to say that the CIC vinyl sealer is somehow they hit the formula right, because while vinyl sealer is pretty generic, it's kind of like chocolate cake. It's all chocolate cake. It's kind of the same stuff. And yet the CIC vinyl sealer, like you said, it sands easier in general than most vinyl sealers. And it dries quicker, and it doesn't smell quite so bad. And that's sometimes an issue, if you're finishing in your house or finishing in your garage and you don't want the whole house to stink with lacquer. That's why, or times people are doing a job up in a condominium and they're actually not allowed to use salt-based products. The vinyl sealer is still an option because it doesn't smell that bad. Now, we have options if you can't use a vinyl sealer at all, but that being said, it's in that narrow band of it doesn't smell too bad, it dries quickly, and it sands easily compared to others.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I would recommend, and that's something that you guys are doing, is we've talked so much about vinyl sealer, is that you guys have the ability to put vinyl sealer in spray cans. So even if you're going to use a water-based primer, it's good to have a couple of cans just for spot issues. Even what he was talking about before, you have a burn through or something, just take the can, spray it on the corner, let it dry, scuff it real lightly instead of having to pull your spray rig back out. Especially when you're new and getting started, you've got one gun that does everything. And it's nice to have that. And then you're like, oh man, I got to unload this and then put this back in. And it's a real headache. So even no matter what you're doing, it's always good to have a can of vinyl sealer around. You just can't go wrong. So I'd highly recommend that for sure.
Right. Yeah. We've talked about this. I'm actually sending you a bunch complimentary, and I'm going to have them manufactured so that we have them on hand to sell. We're going to have, and it's not a problem because here at Annex Paint we have the tool to make spray cans. So it's just a matter of taking the paint, putting it in a tool, and making the spray can. We're going to make it in clear and white, and I might even do a gray too, a medium gray. Yeah. So just to keep it. So any finishing situation can be covered.
Yeah, but if you're doing a dark color, you can use that gray.
Right, exactly. And yes, just like exactly you said, sand throughs are not uncommon. So you can just pull out your spray can and hit a corner, and you're away. And that technique or that trick of making sure your primer is perfect, it makes it so much easier because you can now put on primer, sand it down, put on primer, sand it down, put on primer, sand it down. Hopefully as you get good, you won't have to go through that evolution so many times, but still that's the evolution that you have to go through to get it looking perfect.
Yeah. And going back to that a little bit about sanding through, it's okay if you sand through, because essentially what you're trying to do is you're not sanding smooth, you're sanding flat. I think that's a good way to say it. And so you want a flat surface. If you're getting started, a lot of guys, I would suggest, I have a really expensive surf prep lighting system, which you guys probably have and can sell. It creates a rake lighting situation over your doors or your substrate. But I would suggest going down to Harbor Freight or somewhere and get yourself some kind of LED light system, even if you're working on tabletops and stuff, so that you can see across that surface, and to see where your problems are and where you're not flat. I mean, you'll see it. It's completely obvious, and that will help you out a ton.
Right. On that note, there's actually another really good book that I've told you about, and I know the author of, um, Understanding Wood Finishing by Bob Flexner. Is a great book, and like just as exactly as you said, you have your straight, and then you have your light at a sharp angle to it. You can see imperfections. Light, it's a very good point because lighting is key. Particularly if you're finishing cabinets in a shop and it's getting dark. We're into the winter months. You've got one halogen. It's I've been in this spot before where you're trying to get some work done and there's one crappy light in the background and you can't see your work. It sounds silly, but it's really true. If you don't have your workspace well lit so that you can actually see what you're doing, it's amazing how bad it will look when it does get into the light.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a serious struggle on some of these job sites. Even in these houses, the lighting is terrible, which is kind of a blessing and a curse because at least you know if it's going to look good in the lights that you're putting it in. When you put it in the house, it's going to look fine. But sometimes it's hard to get a good finish, and you're having to move lights around and all this sort of stuff. Like I think I have like 5 lights now I carry with me on job sites. It's crazy.
But it's really key, and it's it is. I've had it happen myself. When I'm, it's kind of crazy. I have finishing shops at my disposal all through Southern California, and of course, when I have my finishing project, it's in my backyard, with the tarp, and things like that. And sure enough, I come home, I'm doing something late into the afternoon, and the light's bad, and I'm finishing it in the evening, and I get in there and I spray it. And then I go back in the morning with the light in there and it just looks terrible. So lighting is key.
Yeah. And on that note too, a lot of guys think that you have to have, a $50,000 spray booth and all this other stuff to get a good finish. Like, and you were talking about Dennis. Dennis finishes outside.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a covered like area, but it's pretty much he's outside. So, and you can get a good finish in your garage. There's lots of guys that are doing it. Obviously, be safe about it, but you definitely can. And some of the guys like me, we do all this on-site finishing, and I've been in some of the craziest dirty situations, and somehow, you learn to make racks and things out on site that gets it above all the issues and things. But you can get a really good finish on site and in difficult situations and outside even.
Yeah, quite a bit. More than one time I've built a spray booth on a job just with plastic and, 1x1 pieces of pine. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We kind of got sidetracked, but I want to go back and let's talk about sanding and sandpaper. We kind of talked about the lights, but let's actually talk about grit sequence and some of the issues that can happen with finishers like they use, especially with the surf prep stuff. And you get into some of these higher sheens, you can have scratches that show through and things like that. But let's just talk a little bit about sandpaper. What should we be using? How should we be prepping, that sort of thing?
Well, and particularly with water-based, there's a lot of different sandpapers out there. Surf Prep has some great ones. 3M paper, I have Norton. You don't necessarily need to have the most expensive paper, but sanding is all about. First of all, if you're trying to make something flat, and you want to make it scratch free. So when you're getting up to a higher sheen, or if you want going into polish, it's about one degree of grit taking out the scratch from the earlier degree. So 220 is about you might start a rough sand with 180. That's a little coarse. That's very coarse, but you might, if you have a lot of buildup and you need to take something down, you might be sanding your whitewood with, ultimately you want to get it up to 220 or 320. And then if you are trying to get a high and between coats, we're going into a couple different things, but so there's two things that you want to do in between coats. One, you need to make it flat, and two, in between coats, you want to take out any burrs or any bumps or anything. So, but if it's flat, oftentimes you can actually scuff in between coats with just a 3M pad, and just so you get a scuff, and that's got you know, that's, I don't know what the grid is on that, but you're just getting a nice scuff onto a piece of something that you've already put down a coat or two on. I wouldn't recommend that unless you've got a very flat surface without any burrs, because that won't take off trash out of your coating. When you're standing up for a high polish, you're migrating from one degree of coarseness of scratch to the next. So you might start with some 320, go to 400, 600, 800, 1,000 even. But that's something that you don't see too often actually in the wood finishing, because we're not getting into high polish in this industry as much as you do in the automotive industry. But we have sandpapers all the way up to 3,000 grit, and boy, you can take a wood finish. You can take either a lacquer or a water base and make it so shiny that you can shave in it.
Yeah, and speaking of that, the probably one of the best water bases for producing a high gloss finish is the polyurethane that CIC has. It's one of the glossiest off the gun finishes, and if you let it dry a couple days, man, you can get a mirror finish. Like you can basically shave in it for sure.
And that's straight out of the gun. That's even before you start cooking it.
Yeah. So let me go back. So just to clarify so that people understand. So if you're whitewood sanding, I think the trick is if you're starting out on whitewood and you got cabinets from a good source that used a wide belt sander, and they finished at 180, then probably to remove those scratches, you want to start at 180. Now, however, if you have a spot that is not leveling, then at that point you would want to go down to a 120 to get that out, then back up to a 180. The same applies in your primer coats. And I want to differentiate a little bit because I know you guys sell the surf prep stuff, and a lot of new guys are confused about fine, very fine, all that stuff versus actual sandpaper. So if you're using an actual sandpaper, like a 320, it's going to cut much, much faster than the equivalent in a foam pad because you have cushion on it. So that's something to remember. So generally your primer coats, you can go down as far as 220. That's a little aggressive.
Right.
Some guys do it if you're really good at it. I would say 320 to 400 in that range. And then in between your top coats, especially with water base, you want to be in the 400 to 600 if you're above a 20 sheen. Because if you do a 320 scratch, it will actually show through in a 30 sheen. So I have a lot of guys, they'll call me and be like, hey, I can still see the sanding scratches. What'd you sand with? 320. That's why. And a lot of times, even if you cut your primer, so if you're doing a 30 sheen, a lot of times you'll have to do 2 top coats, because if you sand with 320, you will see the scratches even from the primer. A trick is to level sand it and then refine the scratch with a higher grit, which is what Greg is talking about. He alluded to that when he was talking about, basically removing the next scratch. So that's something that you can do with water base. Like I have that sometimes. You shoot a top coat and you get a big old goober or something in it, and you're trying to sand it with 600 and you can't get it out. So what I'll actually do is drop down, and then after I get that out, I'll go back up to refine that scratch.
Right. It's a progression. I mean, you can take out You can take out a 320 scratch with 600 grit paper, but it'll take you all day. So you have
Right.
it's you're stepping up and down, and of course the heavier the grit, the deeper the scratch. So, in addition, and I've alluded to this not when we've talked about it, but in addition to the CIC things, we will be also bringing in some of the Circa products here in Annex, which is exciting. You've done a lot with the Circa, so the CIC is a phenomenal product, but I'd like to be able to offer some other things. The Circa, I was testing the Circa. Actually, Dennis Rodriguez and I were playing with the Circa primer, and the Circa is a phenomenal system. That's a product though that needs an airless only. That won't come out of your cup gun. I don't have it in stock yet, but we're working on that. Again. As we're talking to the new finisher, I love your questions when you call up. Sometimes I don't get to my phone. If you call me and you don't get through, send me a text. I'll get back with you. I don't mind answering the questions, and I love talking.
So what would you recommend products that you carry to a new finisher? Like, what would be your, like, someone says, hey, I saw Eric Reason's video, and what would you recommend to the new guy starting out, like, that you carry?
Well, they're all on your show.
Yeah, that's true.
All on your show, and we have some new things. I mean, we've promoted the water-based conversion coating quite a bit, which has been great, and it's a phenomenal product. That, along with the vinyl sealer, there's a lot of people who are really happy with that. We have it in satin, gloss, and flat. We have it in white. We can tint it for you. That's not a problem. We now have the newer polyurethane. It's either priced the same or it's just a little bit more expensive. The new hybrid polyurethane has turned out to be a real winner. It goes on easily, and it's a little less. It's a little bit more user friendly, and you can do more things with it. By the nature of its chemistry, you can spray it just by itself, and it will dry just fine. Or you can add a hardener to it, and it will dry even harder. You have to watch out when you add hardeners. As a point, you add pot life, and pot life is, a hardener will make it get hard. So it's if after a certain amount of time, it's going to get hard in your gun, which is a scary thing when you find you think that you have a lot of time and it's going off in your gun. You need to empty it out and get it cleaned out quickly, of course. That's a great go-to product because it is very user-friendly, and it has a very good vertical hang. So in other words, you can spray it and it won't run on you, whereas the CIC conversion varnish tends to be a little bit thinner. And you have to put on more coats to get your full build sometimes when you're spraying up and down on the side of a cabinet. Those are the things. Those are my go-tos. Those two there.
All right, so let's talk about this real quick. Everybody wants to know the difference, because you can also put cross-linkers in these things. What's the difference between a hardener and a cross-linker, and where should I use one or the other? So I'm going to give you guys my opinion here on this, okay? So both of them promote cross-linking, which is what some people get confused. But there's a difference between sort of the outcomes of them. So as a general rule, the cross-linker will improve your chemical resistance. Sometimes MAR resistance. It depends on the product, and that's another test don't guess thing. I have seen it improve that, but generally that's what it does. And basically, if you think about it like this, if I've got this is your coating, all right, by itself, there's holes in it, and when you add that cross-linker to it, it increases the tightness of the webbing of the coating and makes it tighter and more resistant to chemicals. All right. Now, the hardener, it can increase chemical resistance. It increases adhesion. but the main thing is the hardness of it. So, if you're doing tabletops or things like that, and you want a super hard surface, that's kind of the way to go. Now, also, you got to consider too, the crosslinker is very expensive because you have to buy a quart of it. So it's like $150 or something like that for a quart of it. Although you're only adding 1% to 5% to it. Pretty much most crosslinkers are 1%. And there's no pot life to it. But so you buy that quart, if you're not going to use it consistently, it makes more sense actually to use the hardener, because the hardener is going to be less in the short term than it would be in the long term, if that makes sense. Does that compute?
Yeah. Exactly. I have a different take on how the difference between crosslink. I mean, it's interesting to hear that, because I've always had my spiel on it, which is a little bit different. Sure. But cross-linking is, if you consider you're coating a drum head, it's got a certain amount of flex, a certain amount of bounce to it. And what the cross-linker does is actually dry it. It pulls it tighter. It actually, technically, it dries it out chemically further. So it actually tightens up. And that gives you the mar resistance and things like that. And yes, the advantages to the crosslinker is that you don't have a pot life, so you can add your 5% today, and if you don't spray it all out, you can add another 5% tomorrow. I think you can only do that once or twice before you're now getting into some strange chemistry with too much old crosslinker in a bucket, but nonetheless, it doesn't give you a pot life. And the hardener, on the other hand, what the hardener does is the hardener is like an epoxy or a polyurethane. There's part A and part B, and when these two things get together, there's a chemical reaction, and they're bonding chemically. And you'll notice oftentimes when you have these two component things, they'll actually get hot. A lot of epoxies are like that. With the water bases, the heat generated in the chemical reaction is very slight, but nonetheless, it's a chemical reaction, and the molecules are bonding, so that's making it exponentially harder. Though that's something that you don't need for your kitchen cabinets, but for tables, for outside gear, for industrial stuff, for commercial bookshelves, for stores, shelving in stores, you want to use a 2-component urethane.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest with you, now it's become so popular, most guys are using it on kitchen cabinets now.
Right.
And it's an upsell. It's an upsell. I mean, when I sell that finish, I mean, it's a lot more expensive.
There you go. And there's another thing too, which is, I've said, well, they say, should I use this polyurethane? And I go, well, you don't have a commercial kitchen. And he says, yes, but I've got 3 kids. I said,
okay, there you go. That's worse than the commercial kitchen.
Yeah, I'll give your kitchen more abuse, And then they'll say, I've got 3 really rambunctious kids. I'll say, build your kitchen out of stainless steel. No.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. I know we've joked with that with Thomas Craven. He's had lots of finishing woes with some of these things, and we just said, why don't you just tell him to make it out of stainless steel?
Right.
So, well, yeah, and essentially we're saying the same thing. We're just using a different example, I guess. One note I will say though about the CIC polyurethane is generally when you add hardeners to products, it slows the dry time down. But that particular product, it doesn't slow the dry time down too much. Like, it's very, very slight. It's probably the fastest drying 2-component that's on the market that I've seen. A lot of the other ones, it takes quite a bit. I mean, that's something that you got to consider if you're trying to pump stuff out. A single component with the crosslinker is going to dry a lot faster than you add the hardener to it.
Right. No, it's funny. I talked to one of the CIC reps today, and I learned something I didn't really know. But and this might not be for this particular discussion, but with this particular polyurethane that you had dubbed the Victoria's Secret polyurethane, the catalyzation is actually somewhat because it's a two component product. You can catalyze it as much as 25% or 4-to-1, and it will get really, really hard and it'll be almost brittle. You can also catalyze it a little bit less. You can catalyze it 15%, and it will not dry so quickly because, yeah, you're right. It has a pot life of about an hour if you catalyze it at 25%. So if that's an issue, you can catalyze it a little bit less. You'll still have that extreme durability with the cross-link phenomena, and yet it won't go off on you quite so quick in the gun.
Yeah. Generally with that particular product, I do 10%. I find that that's plenty. But yeah, you can obviously go higher if you want to. I know one of the guys on Instagram, Great Plains, he does a lot of mill work, and he's done a couple tables, and he loves that product. And he just did some pine tabletops for a restaurant, and he catalyzed it at 25%. And I was like, holy cow, man, that's a lot.
And if you're going to buff and polish, that's where I'd go with that, because it will make it really, really hard for buff and polish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, once again, I love the calls, and if you do call me, if you need some help, and I don't call you back, send me a text, because I don't mind helping out new finishers. Sometimes in the past, people have made this sound like it's alchemy and impossible to understand, and only the truly blessed can be finishers, and that's not the case. I know a lot of women finishers out there that are actually phenomenally good, and sometimes I think they're a little bit better because they're willing to say they don't know what they don't know and learn.
And I've got a couple of women that I gotta have on the show. They're a little bit harder to pull onto the show. They I don't know if they're just a little more shy or something, but I've got a couple of them that I've been working on for a while, and I'm hoping to get them on the channel because they got a lot to offer.
Yes, I'd love to see it. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, hey, I appreciate your time. As always, it's always good talking to you. And before we get off, do you want to leave your contact information, and then I'll also leave it in the description below?
Sure. So the best way to contact me is via email, and it's greg@annexpaint.com. My phone number is on the website. My personal cell is 818-439-9297. Calling me is somewhat difficult because I'm on the phone all the time, or I'm driving, or if I'm in someone's shop, I don't answer my phone. So you're always welcome to text.
Perfect. All right.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime, man. We'll do it again for sure. I appreciate it.
Awesome.